Ultrakill is one of the best boomer shooters I've ever played. While the main reason is the gameplay, there are many different factors as to why I love this game. Its soundtrack, its aesthetic, and its lore. In this video, I will be talking about the entirety of Ultrakill, so if you're planning on playing the game, be warned, there are both gameplay and story spoilers ahead. With the intro out of the way, let's head right into the game. The game opens with a boot up screen, letting you customize your settings at the beginning instead of wandering around in the settings menu blindly. After setting everything up, the setting menu fades, and you're met with nothing but 3 sentences. Mankind is dead, blood is fuel, hell is full.
How can this be? Bested by this thing? You insignificant fuck! This is not over! I will cut you down, break you apart, spray the gore of your profane form across the stars. I will grind you down until the very spark cries for mercy. My hands shall relic, ending you here and now.
This level is a pretty good starting point for the game, introducing its mechanics like parrying and boss fights, which you'd assume normally wouldn't work in an FPS, but Ultrakill pulls them off pretty damn well. Another mechanic which will be important later is the scoring system. Inspired by games like Devil May Cry and Bayonetta, you're graded on your performance in the level based on 4 different factors, giving you a rank from D to S. You're graded on how fast you complete the level, how many enemies you kill, how stylish you were, and how many times you died. If you can complete a level with S in every rank without dying, you're rewarded with a P rank, which will come in a bit handy later. Dropping down into the next level, you see a yellow terminal, which will let you read about enemies you've encountered and buy new weapon mods. Your pistol has 3 different variants: the Piercer, which lets you charge a shot that will pierce through enemies and do a lot of damage on one target, the Marksman, which lets you throw a coin in the air which can be comboed off of, and the Sharpshooter, which lets you spin the revolver and charge a piercing shot which can ricochet off of walls and detonate projectiles in midair. Walking into the first room, you see a yellow robot walk past the door before it shuts abruptly, throwing you into a combat encounter. Fighting the enemies, you get to move forwards in the level, seeing the robot slice apart enemies just before you can get to them. Now, if you're an explorative little fella, and you like searching every nook and cranny of levels, like me being a loot goblin, then you may have found a blue skull in a vent high up. Putting this on a pedestal in an empty room that you wouldn't normally come across unless you're, exploring, this will open the door to a black and gold exit, instead of the usual red and gold. This will take you to a secret level, which we'll be talking about later. Once you take this, either the secret exit or the normal one, past the combat encounters, this ends the level and you move on. This level has the unique way to break its linear nature. If you smash the glass and perform an intended mechanic, you can launch yourself to the end of the level and fight the boss of both phases instead of fighting it in 2 separate encounters. But assuming you're playing it how it was meant to be played, and, how the devs intended, you fight your way through a few encounters until you find a spiral staircase. At the top, there's a cracked rock which you can't break. Backtracking, you walk down the staircase and make it into another door which you passed by before. This will lead you down to a boss fight with the swords machine. Once you get it to half health, it drops its shotgun and disappears, waiting to be fought later in the level. The shotgun that you get has 2 different modifications. The core eject, letting you fire a grenade, which you can hold the trigger of to make it launch farther, and the pump shotgun, which you can pump to make the spread tighter. If you charge it to the maximum, however, it overloads and creates an explosion instead of firing. Fighting past everyone, you encounter the swords machine again. Killing it, you move on to the next level. There's not really much to this level, other than the fact that it just throws all of the enemies you've encountered up until this point at you in different encounters, testing your skills to see if you're capable enough to progress further. There's not much other to it than that, so let's just move on to the final level of this act. This is your first real boss level. Making your way through some parkour, you end up in a seemingly empty room, before the statue on your left comes to life. Once getting the boss to half of its health bar, the other statue in the room comes to life as well, requiring you to fight both of them at once. When one dies, however, the other will become enraged, attacking faster and doing more damage. Once you kill them both, though, you exit the level, entering hell. You remember how you grabbed that skull earlier and put it on the pedestal, unlocking the black and gold exit? We're talking about that level now. This is the first of 5, technically 7, secret levels, each of which have a unique gimmick. mostly being parodies or jokes. This level is no exception, being a fetch quest horror parody, where you must bring 2 skulls to 2 different pedestals while being hunted by a spooky stick figure. This may bring to mind the 2012 game Slender, the 8 Pages, and I believe this level is parodying games of that era specifically. Once you've completed the level, you're greeted by a black terminal instead of the usual yellow. On it, it has a wall of text talking about something being a failure and how the results refuse to alter. Quick disclaimer, all of the information in these sections is mostly sourced from terminal entries, environmental storytelling, and a little bit of filling in the blanks on my part, so please excuse any inaccuracies. Prelude takes place on Earth, in some mining facility stationed right next to the mouth of Hell. Different demons or lost souls made their way out, doomed to wander the now empty halls until you came along killing all of them. Assumedly, these demons are the reason as to why there are no people in this facility, most likely killed off by the creatures. The Cerberus which you fight in 05 have a resemblance in name to the god of the dead Hades' dog Cerberus, which, in Greek mythology, guarded the gates of the underworld, preventing all but the deceased from moving on. One thing you'll have noticed in 05 is the phrase on the door, "Abandon hope, all ye who enter in," which is one of the first elements taken from the 14th century poem, The Divine Comedy, better known by its first third, Dante's Inferno. The original phrase, as written in the translation I own, reads, "Through me the way is to the city dolent, through me the way is to eternal dole, through me the way among the people lost, justice incited my sublime creator, created me divine omnipotence, the highest wisdom and the primal love. Before me there were created no thing, only etern and I eternal last. All hope abandon ye who enter in." Most people only know the last sentence, which is a shame because the whole thing sounds amazing together. Entering Hell for the first time, you will most likely be very confused, as this is not what you were expecting whatsoever. You're greeted by a calm and serene atmosphere, with trees and the sounds of birds chirping being some of the first things you'll notice. Before you move on, make sure to toss a coin in the fountain, which will open up a door to the secret level on this layer, which we'll talk about later. This level introduces you to skulls, which function somewhat like the colored skulls in classic Doom, bringing them from point A to point B to unlock a door. Blazing through this level, you'll soon find your next weapon, the nail gun. This rifle-esque firearm has 2 different weapon mods: the magnet, which lets you fire up to 3 different magnets which attract any nails shot to them, and the overheat, which builds up heat while firing either of the versions, letting you discharge it as a sudden barrage of flaming nails. In the final room of the level, if you decide to break the glass on the ceiling and jump up, you'll find a slab with the Roman numeral for 1 engraved on it. Once you press it, a message appears saying, somewhere in the depths of Limbo, a mechanism is set in motion. Moving on, you make it to the next level. In this level, you're greeted with some enemies in an encounter, which is starting to become the norm. Fighting past some combat encounters, you grab a blue skull and make your way back through a crack in the wall back to the main room. Although, by the time you return, things have changed. The previously calm area is now set ablaze, the grass scorched and trees burning down around you. This is where the street cleaners are first introduced, flamethrower-wielding robots which seek to melt you down to nothing but a heap of scrap. Killing them, you place the blue skull on its pedestal and grab the red skull in the next room. Bringing it back to the first room, you set it down and open the door that was staring you in the face since you got there. Walking in, if you decide to be a silly little guy and take a right instead of going straight, you'll find 2 separate cracked walls, and moving past them, you find a dungeon hidden behind them. Encountering a mini-boss, the cancerous rodent, you kill it and backtrack, only for you to be met with a larger version of the rat you just killed, the very cancerous rodent. After taking it out, you'll find another slab, this time with the Roman numeral for 2 on it. Pressing it, you're greeted with the same message from before. Backtracking a bit more, you go to the final room, kill everyone inside, and move on to end the level. This level has a unique gimmick, giving you the choice of 2 different paths to open the main door, going either left or right to grab either the red or blue skull. While you have the choice to grab either, you also have the choice to grab both, which will cause a window behind you to slide down, opening up the secret room. Walking past the now lowered window, you'll encounter 2 swords machines, Tundra and Agony, which have the gimmick of not dying fully unless both are killed at the same time, or around the same time. Once you defeat them, you'll find the 3rd slab, which gives you the same message as the previous 2 when you touch it. Heading back to the original room, you walk through a main door which you needed the skull to open, bringing you to a boss fight with the hideous mass. This boss will spam shockwaves and launch homing explosives at you, forcing you to move around the arena if you want to survive the fight. Once you get him to about a quarter of his health, he'll become enraged and attack quicker until you kill him. Once he's dead, you move on and end the level. This level is the first to employ a major amount of environmental storytelling, with books scattered about which you can read for minor glimpses into the past. Going straight, you'll find a door with 3 different blue skull pedestals, which you'll need to find the skulls for around the level. While exploring, you'll most likely find the 4th slab, in front of the door which has the Roman numerals for 1 through 4 on it. Once you press the slab, you're not greeted with text this time, but the door behind it opens, revealing the first weapon alternate you'll find, the slab revolver. This version of the revolver can be equipped on any variant, changing the base fire so that it does more damage, but requiring it to be cocked back after each shot. I personally have it equipped on the piercer and sharpshooter, not the marksman. The reasoning behind this has stuff to do with the way the coin functions in the game, but I'm not nearly qualified enough to talk about it, so just go watch Herb Messiah's video on it. Once you go grab the first skull, you bring it to the pedestal, only to be greeted by some red robot sliding past you as you backtrack. Knowing how confusing the skull placements in this level are, after the 30 minutes you'll spend looking for and finding the skulls, you bring them back and open the door to the boss arena. Walking in, the red robot from before crashes through the window in front of you and does a little bow before springing into action to kill you. This is V2, the upgraded model of You. He functions as a quick vibe check to make sure you know how to use the movement and dodge well, as he's just as quick as you and has your piercer revolver and core-eject shotgun. Once you rough him up enough, he runs off, but forgets his arm in the process. This is the Knuckle Blaster, an alternate arm which does a lot of damage, can knock enemies in the air, and blow projectiles back pretty inconsistently though. Among the things it cannot do, however, is parry, so it functions as a combo tool and not a replacement for your feedbacker arm. Secret level time. This is a secret level for the Slayer, parodying a puzzle game known as The Witness. After getting past the most difficult battle in the game, Colors, you get to the end of the level and move on. There's not really much to talk about with this one other than, well, puzzles. So let's move on to talking about the story. The Slayer's serene atmosphere actually has its roots in Dante's Inferno, in which the people who were sentenced to the first layer of hell hadn't really done much in life. But the reason they're in hell is because they did not follow Christ in his teachings, or were unbaptized, dooming them not to torment, but to endless nothing. In the original poem, Limbo is depicted as Earth, but without death. Basically an existential nightmare. In the level 1-4, there's a book on a desk, which, if you pick up and read, talks about an assumed angel, Gabriel, and how the author has been waiting for him to come bring him to heaven, but is slowly losing his faith. This is the second layer of hell. Walking out of the spawn, you'll probably be reminded of the industrial aesthetic of Prelude in the first combat encounter. Once you walk out the door at the top of the tower, however, you're launched up onto the bridge overlooking a sprawling metropolis, a giant figure with spotlight-esque eyes walking around in the distance. You make your way across the bridge to the other tower, making your way up just to jump off the top down to the level exit. Exiting the previous level, you move on, and this level that you're in now takes place in the city you saw before, requiring you to break 3 different circuit breakers to unlock the door that's barring you from the rest of the level. I really wish the game experimented with stuff like this more, as you don't need to kill any of the enemies here to progress, just smash the breakers and like other doors used in most levels. Fighting past all the encounters, you'll soon find a room with your next weapon. This game's equivalent to the BFG 9000, the rail cannon. Because Ultrakill lacks an ammo system, the way this weapon works is that it has a 16-second cooldown, recharging whether you have it in your hands or not, letting you use it, then use your other weapons while the rail cannon is indisposed. This weapon, like the revolver, has 3 different weapon modifications. The electric rail cannon, functioning like an instant charge piercer revolver shot, though doing slightly more damage. The screwdriver rail cannon, which launches a drill, which on contact with an enemy will latch on, making them bleed constantly for about 8 seconds. As of the Violent Night update, this weapon is actually usable in areas other than boss arenas, letting you punch the drill and making it deal all of its remaining damage at once, before launching in the direction you were facing it when you parried. The third weapon modification is the Malicious Rail Cannon, functioning the same as the Maurice's Charged Laser Beam, creating an explosion on contact with any surface. This can also be combined with the core-eject shotgun's alt-fire for explosive results. Making your way around the final room of the level, you smash into the 3 circuit breakers to unlock the door. Although when wandering around, you may find a portrait of a man with a bramble crown covering his eyes. This figure will be very important to the story, but this isn't the section where I talk about that, so we'll discuss it later. Once the breakers are destroyed, you exit the level, moving farther down the city. The next level takes place in what I believe to be a water treatment plant, and has you going through collecting skulls and bumbling around until you find your way out. The stage also contains the entrance to this layer's secret level, accessed by destroying 3 breakers like in the last level, but this time you're draining the water from the level to make traversal easier, and to get behind the waterfall in one of the rooms. This level also introduces the Mind Flayer enemy. I don't really have much to say about them, except that they'll become a contributing factor to my declining mental state later in the game. Killing everyone in the building, you move on to the climax of Lust. Dropping down past the surface of the city you were in before, you end up in a dingy subway, the style and architecture reminiscent of the inside of the tower you were met with upon first entering the lair. Hopping on the conveniently placed tram, you move forwards, unlocking a large gate with a blue skull you find to your left. Once the very slow gate finally opens, you make your way onwards until your tram abruptly stops. You hear shaking and see dust particles falling before a giant hand sneaks down the tunnel, tossing shockwaves at you until you deal enough damage to drive it off. The tram's power is restored, and you make your way forwards, seeing a red skull's pedestal to your left, letting you know that you need to delve deeper to get the skull that goes to it. Once you retrieve the skull and place it where it belongs, the ceiling starts shaking before it suddenly crumbles and you're met with the hulking figure looming over the city you saw in the first level. This is the corpse of King Minos, who has one of the sickest boss fights in the game. His main attack is to punch, slap, or smash you with one of his fists, but all of these attacks, despite not having a flash, are all parryable. Once you smack him around enough, 2 parasites burst out of his eyes, being the thing controlling him, not Minos' soul, which we'll get to soon enough. Once the fight ends, the giant falls down and an exit shows up in his mouth, allowing you to move on to the final layer of Act 1, Gluttony. The secret level in this layer is a visual novel, the tonal shift being reminiscent of the game Doki Doki Literature Club. It begins with describing somebody running to make it to a building, food hanging out of their mouth as they run, which, yes, is a joke about anime characters running to school with toast in their mouth. The person then bumps into another student, knocking them both down. This is Mirage, whose design is literally just V1, the player, in a schoolgirl outfit. The conversation starts normally, talking about being late for school, but the discussion soon unravels. This level is perfect to walk in blind with, so please go play it for yourself, just make sure you're in a good headspace before you do so. In Inferno, this layer is reserved for sinners whose main crime was being lustful, duh, breaking the bonds of marriage for quick satisfaction, doomed in death to constantly be battered by heavy winds, while those who got even less lucky are tossed around like leaves in the never-ending hellscape of wind. This layer has a bit more world building than the previous, introducing one of the major players in this story, King Minos. According to terminal entries in a book found in 2.2, King Minos thought it was foolish to damn souls if their only crime was loving another, so he became the ruler of the Lust Layer and created a city where souls could live their afterlives in peace. Unfortunately, as they're in hell, they're not supposed to do anything other than suffering, so the angel Gabriel came down and murdered Minos as he tried reasoning with the heavenly figure. His corpse was damned to wander the layer, destroying the same city he dedicated his afterlife to building. Piloted by parasites, his soul is brought deeper into hell, which we'll talk about later. This layer doesn't really introduce anything new in terms of mechanics. Being the crescendo of Ultrakill's first act, it kind of throws everything you've experienced up until this point, other than the bosses, at you, taking off the training wheels and saying, "Don't suck, LIMBO." Fighting your way through the fleshy terrain, you beat the level and move forwards, determined to blaze through Hell's forces until there are none left. Pushing on in the next level, you head forwards, getting past some basic parkour before being greeted with a heavenly voice.
Machine, turn back now. The layers of this palace are not for your kind. Turn back, or you will be crossing the will of God.
Ignoring the warning, you keep pressing forwards until the voice booms again, threatening your life this time.
Your choice is made. As the righteous hand of the Father, I shall rend you apart, and you will become inanimate once more.
Making your way through a very cramped tunnel, you end up in a boss arena, in which you find the man telling you to turn back.
Behold, the power of an angel!
This is the Archangel Gabriel, the Judge of Hell, whose VA will be a bit familiar to anyone who watched the previous video. You know, if I had a nickel for every time I made a video on a game with Gianni Metrograno playing a religious zealot, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. In my personal opinion, this boss is the least fun in the game, having very few parryable attacks, and the few that are parryable have quite strict timing. Once you damage him down to a second health bar, his armor turns a blood red and he becomes enraged.
Fucking die!
Attacking faster and using all of his non-parryable attacks even more often. On violent difficulty, one of his swords rotates around him in this phase of the fight, making for an easy heal if you can parry it. Once the second health bar is taken down, he has this to say.
What? How can this be? Bested by this thing? You insignificant fuck! This is not over! May your woes be many and your days few.
Moving past him, you exit and end the layer. But Del, I hear you thinking, what about the secret level? Every other layer has had one up until now, and it wouldn't make sense for there not to be one here as well. Well, my dear viewer, there is not a secret level here, there is a secret challenge. In the halls of 3-1, you may have come across a door covered in the letter P. This is why, earlier in the video, I said the level ranking system would come in as a gameplay mechanic later on. This door requires you to perfectly complete all of Act 1 and Prelude for it to open, and no, there is no way for you to get past this door without completing this requirement, you filthy save scummer. There will be no montage here because I've already P-ranked every level on the first try, as this, if you haven't gathered already, is not my first playthrough of the game. Moving past the door, the secret exit is a different color this time, being a white and gold instead of the usual secret level black and gold. This brings you to P1, which is one of my favorite levels in the game. Before we talk about it though, if you don't want this section to be spoiled for you, please use the chapter function on the video and skip to the Layer 3 story analysis chapter. Still here? Cool, let's begin. Walking out of the doors of the spawn, you're greeted with nothing but a torch and a spine extending into the darkness. Walking down the spine, you hear nothing but your footsteps and faint classical music, with the further down you get, the more the wind obscures the music. Once you reach the bottom of the spine and hop through a suspicious mouth, the music abruptly stops. Placing the torch on a pedestal, the door in front of you opens up, revealing a checkpoint and a dark tunnel. Once you walk into the tunnel, the light turns on, revealing a boss, the Flesh Prison. This geometrical bastard will rock your shit back to the first layer of hell, using a variety of attacks, including but not limited to a barrage of homing projectiles, heavenly fire, and summoning 12 different eyes which all attack you individually. These eyes also have a secondary function, which is if you don't destroy them all and focus on doing damage to the boss, as is your natural gaming instinct, they heal the Flesh Prison, regaining more health for the amount of eyes alive. Let that sink in for a second. You've been plowing through all of the bosses in this game previously, but now this fucker can heal as well, using your gimmick for himself. After a long and difficult fight, you destroy the Flesh Prison, and it explodes in a shower of blood and gore. Before you can celebrate though, you notice a blue orb floating down from where the prison was. Once it hits the floor, it takes form and gives a speech.
Ah, free at last. Oh, Gabriel, now dawns thy reckoning, and thy gore shall glisten before the temples of man. Creature of steel, my gratitude upon thee for my freedom. But the crimes thy kind have committed against humanity are not forgotten, and thy punishment is death.
This is Minos Prime, the soul of the Lust Layer's previous ruler, confined to the lair of Gluttony, as he was just too powerful to be killed outright. This is my second favorite boss in the game, as he fights with honor, dignity, and, callouts. Whenever this Fallen King attacks you, he screams his move at you like an anime character. His different moves include Judgment, a move where he moves to you and drop kicks you so hard it causes an explosion. Thy End Is Now, a 3-hit combo similar to Prepare Thyself, which if it hits you can send you into the air with an uppercut to be juggled harder than a Little Mac main. The moves Crush and Die, which both have Minos trumped in the air and do a ground slam onto the floor, which will cause a shockwave which ripples throughout the arena. He also has a projectile attack which does not have an audio cue but can be used at the end of combos or if you're too far away from him. One quick thing I should mention is that on Violent difficulty, Minos' attacks are no longer parryable once you get him to half health, which has the sound cue of Minos calling you weak. Once you finally kill the disgraced monarch, he gives a few lines with his final breath.
Forgive me, my children, for I have failed to bring you salvation from this cold, dark world.
Once he crumbles into nothing, a door opens up, being the exit to the level. We're talking about the story of Gluttony now. In Inferno, the lair of Gluttony is a frigid wasteland, with snow and hail raining down on the sinners who reside. To add on to this torture, Cerberus runs around, tearing people apart until they're indistinguishable slabs of meat. This is no escape, however, as anyone torn apart slowly and painfully reforms over the course of centuries. Eternity is a long time, after all. This layer doesn't exactly have much environmental storytelling. It's piece of the lore told through terminal entries and a bit of filling in the blanks on my end. The boss you fight at the end of the act, Gabriel, is the same angel who executed Minos, whose will was so strong in his death he formed into a Prime Soul. A Prime Soul, in the lore, is someone whose will was so strong in life and had such a large presence in history, in death they became the strongest possible spirit. As a quick explanation, they're just canonically built different. Minos' soul was confined to the lair of Gluttony upon him forming into a Prime Soul, being contained by the Flesh Prison you killed earlier. With the death of the prison, his soul is released and he attempts to judge you for your wicked and selfish actions. Of course, he fails to kill you, and you continue your progress into Hell, beginning Act 2 with the 4th layer of Hell, Greed. Walking out of the spawn, you're greeted with an aggressively yellow environment, a giant pyramid towering over you with the sun behind it, casting silhouettes of large beings carrying giant rocks up the building. This level has a pretty cool aesthetic, introducing you to the first non-boss angel enemy and a new power-up, the Dual-Wield Orb. Picking it up will let you dual-wield your weapons, duh. It can also be stacked to give V1 more arms to hold guns with. It is temporary most of the time, but the length changes on the level it appears in. Moving on, you're now much closer to the pyramid you saw before, and you can actually walk on the sand in this level, though it does damage you. The mechanic of sanded enemies is introduced in this level, which means that if an enemy is covered in sand, they will not bleed, which makes healing from anything other than parrying that enemy's attacks impossible. The entrance to this layer's secret mission is also in this level, accessed by turning off the sun and jumping down a hole in the desert. We'll talk about the later on in this section of the video. Gathering 2 different skulls and placing them on their respective pedestals at the end of the level, a boss is summoned, the Sisyphean Insurrectionist. Once you kill it, you move on to the next level, which is one of the more unique stages in the game. This is 4-3, a shot in the dark. The gimmick with this level being that it's basically pitch black, but it gives you a torch to light the way with, setting braziers ablaze to move on, similar to breaking circuit breakers like in 2-2, the level in the Lust layer. This level doesn't really introduce anything new other than the really cool aesthetic, so let's move on to the final level of Greed. This level takes place in the pyramid you've been seeing throughout the layer, and has another alternate weapon to be used, the saw blade launcher. This is an alternate version of the nail gun with reduced ammo and different physics, having the saw blades rotate around the magnet instead of going straight towards it, like the nail gun's projectiles. There is also a beheaded corpse strung up behind where you'll find this weapon, belonging to the deceased King Sisyphus, who will be very important later. Moving on the level, you'll eventually make it to the boss gate, where a familiar figure waits for you. Remember how V2 didn't die when you first fought him and ran away? Well, now it's time for a rematch. He moves faster, has a nail gun, and can shoot your coins out of the air if you aren't fast enough. Once you get his health low enough though, he runs off again, attempting to get away. This time, however, you give chase and actually kill him. On his death, he drops another arm for you to use, the Whiplash, functioning like a grappling hook which can bring light enemies to you and you to heavy enemies. Ending the level, you move on to the 5th layer of Hell, Wrath. Before we talk about Wrath though, we have to talk about the secret level for Greed, Clash of the Bandicoot. Oh my word, that took me way too many tries. This level is a parody of early 2000s platformer games and is the most annoying level to complete in the game, because my depth perception is fucking terrible. Anyway, that's the gist of the level, so let's move on to the story of Layer 4. In Inferno, the punishment for avaricious sinners is that there's basically no space for most of the people, forcing them to constantly run into each other, and the people that do have room are, I shit you not, beating each other with comically large sacks of gold. The layer in-game doesn't really have much storytelling, as anything I can mention here will most likely be repeated when I talk about Layer 6, so let's just move on to Ultrakill's first water level. Wrath's first stage opens up in a tight cave, water dripping off of stalactites scattered about throughout the rocky terrain. One mechanic introduced in this level is grapple points, which change their function depending on what color they are. Green hook points let you grapple to and bring you straight to the orb, while blue hook points launch you past it, like how a slingshot would. Moving through the cramped tunnel, you soon emerge in a large open room, fully submerged in water. Behind where you fell, there are 3 pedestals which all require blue skulls, similar to what 1-4 did. Unfortunately, unlike 1-4, there's no window you can jump through to skip this. Once you complete the 3 combat encounters and place the skulls down, you're allowed to move on, getting to a launch pad which will send you up a shaft to the final arena of the level. If you decide to explore around though, you'll find a breakable vent which will lead you to the entrance to Wrath's secret level, which we'll talk about later. Beating the level, you move on to the next stage. This is one of the more open levels in Ultrakill, letting you just fly over most of the combat encounters instead of fighting them. Moving past the optional combat encounters and entering the cabin, you're introduced to the idol enemy, which will shield an enemy from all damage until the idol is broken with a melee attack. It can't be damaged by normal means. Fighting past a combat encounter, you'll find a blue skull, which when you place it on a pedestal further on, is a cruise ship from the depths of the ocean. Once you find and place the red skull on its corresponding pedestal, it creates some platforms which you can use to get up onto the boat. On the boat, there's the ferryman, which, much like a politician, you can bribe to look the other way while you move past him. If you're going for a P rank though, you have to fight him. So once you kill or bribe him though, you move on and end the level. This level, besides having a banger soundtrack, gives you a new weapon, the rocket launcher. The rocket launcher is unique compared to how other games portray the weapon, as the rocket launcher only does damage on a direct hit. When it hits terrain though, it does no damage and launches any light enemies nearby into the air. It has 2 different weapon mods, the freeze frame, which has the main use of traversal and dealing with a specific enemy in Layer 7, and the SRS cannon, which fires a cannonball that can be comboed with. Other than that, no, the level doesn't really introduce much, so let's move on to the final level of this layer. For the first bit, this level takes place far underwater, having you do some basic parkour until you see a serpent-like figure in the distance. Hopping on a launch pad, you're brought to the surface, where you're met with the being you saw before, the Leviathan. I don't really have much to say about this fight, as it's the easiest boss in the game, at least in my opinion. You kill the worm on a string and move on to my favorite layer, as of this version of the game, Heresy. Before we move on to the 6th layer though, we're gonna have to talk about the secret level in this layer. The secret level here is the fishing level, where you have to collect every fish in order to move on. Not much to the level other than that, so let's move on to the story of Wrath. In Inferno, the punishment for sinners who are angry and wrathful in life is people constantly crawl over each other, trying to get to the shore of the river they're trapped inside of. In-game, Wrath tells the story of the ferrymen, sinners who were so devoted to Gabriel and Heaven's will that even during their punishment, they were granted the ability to pilot the boat ferrying souls to where they belong in Hell. The ferrymen were also responsible for the creation of the idols, which were modeled after the Virgin Mary's likeness. While Heaven's Council would gladly destroy what they saw as abominations, Gabriel took pity upon the sinners and allowed their creations to continue existing, despite their blasphemous nature. Now we move on to the final layer of Act 2, Heresy. This level is similar to 3.1 and 1.4 in that it kind of just throws everything you've seen up until this point at you and expects you to be able to beat it. Other than having a great soundtrack, it doesn't really have much to talk about here, so let's move on to the final level of Heresy. Walking out of the doorway, you're greeted with Gabriel's voice, just as you were at the end of the previous act. He gives a speech about your selfishness until you make it to the boss arena to confront him yourself. This is my favorite fight in the game, so I'm just gonna let it play.
Machine, I will cut you down, break you apart, splay the gore of your profane form across the stars. I will grind you down until the very spots cry for mercy. My hands shall relish, ending you here and now! Twice, beaten by an object. Twice! I've only known the taste of victory, but this taste is this my blood? I've never known such relief. I need some time to think. We will meet again, Machine.
I know his voice actor, Gianni, spends his free time shitposting on the internet, but he does really well in this role. Moving on, you exit the layer and end the act. But wait, there's more. Act 1 wasn't the only part with the secret challenge, as P2 is accessible by P-ranking all of Act 2 and beating P1, which we talked about earlier. As before, there will be no montage of me P-ranking Act 2, as I've already done it. And here's your spoiler warning for this section, as it's best to experience this level as blind as possible. If you wouldn't like to be spoiled, as before, skip to the story analysis of Heresy. Still here? Let's begin. P2 takes the aesthetic of the rest of Heresy and cranks it up to a fat 11, taking place in the city of Dis. Moving through the city to make it to the boss, as you'd expect, you're jumped by Weezer. This level has the most unforgiving enemy placement out of anything currently in the game, throwing a bunch of shit at you and expecting you to adapt. I'm not doing a play-by-play, as that's not fun for you guys to watch or for me to edit, so let's just skip to the end of the level and its highlight, the boss fight. Walking into the final arena, the room suddenly lights up, revealing the Flesh Panopticon, a much more difficult version of the Flesh Prison fight with more attacks and more health. Before you have time to adjust to the boss's attacks, though, a booming voice echoes throughout the chamber.
This prison to hold me. A visitor. Indeed, I have slept long enough. The kingdom of heaven has long since forgotten my name, and I am eager to make them remember. However, the blood of Minos stains your hands, and I must admit, I'm curious about your skills, weapon. And so, before I tear down the cities and crush the armies of heaven, you shall do as an appetizer. Come forth, child of man, and die.
Sisyphus' fight is much harder than Minos', attacking much more chaotically. He also, as of the current update, has the most health of any enemy in the game, clocking in at a whopping 100 health per phase. Speaking of, once you take off his first health bar, he attacks faster and grows a beard. I don't have much to say for him as I do for Minos, so when you finally defeat him, he gives a monologue with his dying breath.
So concludes the life and times of King Sisyphus. A fitting end to an existence defined by futile struggle. Doomed from the very start. And and I don't regret a second of it.
Moving past him, the level ends. In Dante's Inferno, the sixth layer of hell punished those who went willfully against God's will in life, damned to constantly burn inside of rock tombs guarded by fallen angels. This layer also houses a city where sinners are punished, Dis. This is what you fight your way through in Ultrakill, not getting to see much of it in the main levels, but P2 showing you the dev team's interpretation of what it looks like. Heresy doesn't introduce much in its main levels, much like Gluttony, its story being told through terminal entries. While Minos attempted to protect sinners in the Lust layer, Sisyphus led an attack against Heaven, leading the forces of the Greed layer against the Pearly Gates. While Minos was cut down and trapped inside the Flesh prison, Sisyphus was barely able to be contained, as he was just even more built different, busting out of the prison made to contain him once he senses a worthy challenger with barely any effort. It really makes you think, if P1 was only a boss fight and P2 is a full level, what the hell is P3 gonna be? When the full game releases sometime in the next decade and I'm still doing YouTube, I'll remake this video to include all the content not covered in this version. Anyways, moving on, V1 makes it into the third act of Ultrakill, Godfist, Unalive, and the seventh layer of Hell, Violence. Walking out of the spawn, you're flashbanged by the scenery. You make your way into the building in front of you and wander around until you press a button, unlocking a door, which lets you grab the red skull, which you need to progress. Once you walk into the room to put the red skull on its pedestal, however, the statues that were standing still a moment before are scuttling at you like comically large spiders. Making your way past them, and past a few more combat encounters, you're jump-scared by a hulking figure sprinting through the walls right in front of you. Attempting to follow it, you're thrust into even more combat encounters. This level is extremely confusing to navigate if it's your first time, so after wandering about for what'll probably be like 20 minutes, you make it to a hole in the ground. Jumping down that, you make it to a tram, much like the one in 2.4. The only difference being that this one is mandatory in order to progress. Two more trams come forward, both carrying enemies. Once you kill them, another tram comes towards you from behind, before being smashed by the giant figure from before. This is the Minotaur, who I absolutely called being in Layer 7 before the update dropped. It'll use its hammer to swipe at you and smash the trams you're standing on one at a time. Along with throwing piles of poisonous bile at you and having armor encasing most of its body, it makes for a formidable foe. Once you beat it though, it stops moving, quickly being left behind by the speed of the trams you're standing on. Entering the final room, the exit door opens before being shut again as the Minotaur shows up again, making this the third jump scare this level. Once you actually kill it, you move on and end the level. This level introduces a new mechanic, 2 new enemies, and this axe alternate weapon, which unfortunately isn't accessible as of this version of the game. This level has a lot of whiplash parkour, and it introduces a new variant of the hook point, this one being yellow. This variant functions as a time switch, being able to be used to open doors or activate platforms. Once you make it past the parkour, you end up in an empty room, and as you walk towards the door to the exit, it's suddenly destroyed and you're greeted with the Gutterman, an enemy with a minigun and a shield, which only stops firing when you either break line of sight or smash its shield using your red arm's punch. Moving past him, you're greeted with one of my favorite moments in the game. Bombers flying by, giant war machines in the distance, the ground blackened by artillery fire. All of this works together with the soundtrack to make an amazing feeling your first time seeing this. Even the fact that enemies drop down in pods shaped like bombs works so well with the atmosphere. Fighting through some enemies in a downed clock tower, you soon find another tram in a tunnel blocked by rubble, telling you that you're gonna need a bigger boom. Moving forwards with the tram, you soon make your way into a silo, which will need a red skull to move forwards. When you go to grab the red skull, you're introduced to 2 different things: landmines, which set off when you go near them but can be parried when they're in the air to restore health, and the gutter tank, a red variant of the Gutterman with less health, a rocket launcher, and a technically unparryable melee attack. Since their rocket launcher is lore-wise reused technology, you can use your rocket launcher's freeze frame ability to freeze their rockets mid-air, which can be comboed off of. Killing them, you grab the red skull and bring it back to the silo. Making your way through some parkour, you lower the bomb onto your tram, and you bring it back to where you first found the tram, and destroy the rubble, which you can now progress beyond. Getting to the final room, you have to fight off some guttermen and gutter tanks before you can move on and end the level. This level is one of the prettiest in the game, once you get past the people forest. Making your way past some gates, you find a marble white tree, which you're soon told to feed. Killing the red figures that appear, the tree glows red, revealing a door behind it with 3 skull icons, one of which being lit up. One thing I'm going to quickly mention is that Violence's secret level is found in this mission, but much like the alternate weapon, is inaccessible to the player as of this version of the game. Fighting your way through some combat encounters, you feed 2 more trees and make your way back to the first room, moving through the now open door into the end of this level, being very bright like the first level in the layer. Once you kill the enemies and feed 1 final tree, you're able to move on to the final level of Violence and, currently, the game. The level opens in a dimly lit building, requiring you to slide to make your way through a very thin gap before making your way outside to be greeted by the level's boss, the Earth Mover. This boss has been given the nickname Benjamin by the community, and that's what I'll be calling it for the remainder of the level. This boss has the unique gimmick of being the level you fight on, requiring you to make your way up the machine, killing enemies along the way. Once you make your way far enough up, its security system activates, requiring you to kill this in order to move on to the brain of Benjamin. Getting inside the robot, you need to destroy 6 idols in order to be able to move up into the brain of Benjamin, starting the actual boss fight. The actual boss fight requires you to dodge lasers and projectiles while dealing damage to the brain. Once you deal enough damage, a self-destruct timer is activated to try to take you down at any cost. Backtracking, you fight off some enemies and hop on a launch pad, making your way off just in time to see Benjamin explode behind you. After this, the exit opens and you leave the level. Now that we're done here, let's quickly cover Violence's story. In Dante's Inferno, there are actually 3 different sections of violence, separating those who were violent towards others, those who were violent towards themselves, and those who were violent towards God. The punishment for murderers, or those who were violent towards others, was being shot with arrows by centaurs as they climb out of a river. Yes, I'm aware that a lot of these punishments involve rivers. I did not write the poem, Don't Shoot the Messenger. And the punishment for those who were violent towards themselves in life was to be turned into trees and plants, which feel immense amounts of pain when their leaves or branches are snapped off. And the people who were violent towards God's punishment was to be chased around by dogs in the same area-ish as the sinners who were violent towards themselves. In-game, as far as I can tell, only one of these aspects carry over. In 7.3, you walk through a forest of trees shaped like people, who can assume are actually people. But when talking about the in-game lore, Layer 7 is like a monument to humanity's final war, the one which they had before the events of the game. All of the robots that you'd fight in the lair were used in the war, meant to dominate the battlefield. All robots in this universe are powered by blood, but cannot absorb it as V1 can, so they run off of a limited supply. As the Gutterman was essentially a prototype, instead of using a tank of blood, they strapped prisoners of war inside of the machines, barely keeping them alive while their blood is siphoned to power the war machine. The Earth Mover which you fight at the end of the level was created near the end of the war, and once the conflict ended, humanity had to create cities on their back as the ground is blackened and uninhabitable from centuries of war. For now, this is where the game's story ends, and all we can do here, other than speculate, is wait for the next updates to be released for the game. I know this video is on the longer side, so I fully understand if you didn't make it very far, but if you did make it to here, thank you very much. I have more ideas for videos which I'll be working on in the future, and I'll try to keep anyone who cares updated with my community posts. Again, thank you so much for watching, and remember, it's Deladius, not Deladius.